The heavy rain drummed relentlessly against the black umbrellas that surrounded Martha's open grave. The priest was saying something about eternal peace, but the wind snatched his words away before they could reach me. I stood there, 74 years old, feeling the cold seep into my bones, staring down at the polished mahogany casket that held my wife of 48 years. My heart felt hollow, a hollow that only a love spanning nearly half a century leaves behind when it is suddenly and violently ripped away. The police called it a tragic accident. They said the brakes on her old Volvo had simply given out on the steep, winding road of Miller's Pass. But Martha was not careless. She was a senior auditor, a woman who calculated every risk and never left anything to chance. As the first shovel of wet earth hit the casket with a sickening thud, I felt a vibration in my coat pocket. It was my phone. Nobody calls a grieving husband during his wife's burial unless it is an absolute emergency. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the rain. The caller ID flashed a name that made my pulse quicken. Victor Thorne. He was the director of the private wealth management firm where Martha had worked for decades. I stepped away from the mourners, turning my back to the wind, and answered the call. Victor. I whispered, my voice cracking. We are burying her right now. Harrison Victor's voice was frantic, breathless, completely lacking his usual corporate composure. Listen to me very carefully. You need to leave the cemetery right now. Get to my office immediately. Do not tell anyone where you are going. I opened Martha's private safe. I found something, Harrison. You are in immediate danger. My blood ran cold. The rain suddenly felt like ice against my neck. Danger. Victor. What are you talking about? What did you find? I cannot say it over the phone. He stammered, his words rushing together in a panicked blur. Just get here. And Harrison, do not tell your family. Do not trust anyone. Just come. The line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. Do not tell your family. The words echoed in my mind louder than the storm around me. I turned my gaze slowly toward the crowd of mourners. My eyes searched for my son Derek. He was 42, the pride of my life, the boy I had sold my $5 million engineering firm to support when his real estate business hit rock bottom. He was supposed to be standing right beside me, comforting the guests, holding his wife Natalie's hand. But as I scanned the sea of black coats and dark umbrellas, Derek was nowhere to be found. I did not wait for the burial to finish. I quietly slipped away from the grave, ignoring the confused glances of a few extended relatives, and got into my truck. I slammed the door, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. Victor's frantic warning replayed in my head on an endless loop. Martha had always told me that coincidences were just lazy math. She never believed in them. And now, standing over her grave, neither did I. The drive to Victor's office usually took 20 minutes, but in the blinding rain, it felt like an eternity. The windshield wipers frantically beat back the downpour, but they could not clear the fog of dread settling over my mind. I thought about the last few weeks, the missing financial statements, the strange phone calls Derek had been taking in the middle of the night, the way Natalie, my daughter-in-law, had insisted on pouring my coffee every morning with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I had brushed it all off as grief and stress, but Victor's phone call had just ignited a dark, terrifying suspicion in the pit of my stomach. I pulled into the underground parking garage of Victor's office building. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the concrete pillars. The building was mostly empty due to the weekend. I took the elevator to the 14th floor. The ping of the doors opening sounded unnaturally loud in the silent hallway. I stepped out, my boots squeaking on the polished marble floor. The hallway was dimly lit. Victor's office was at the very end of the corridor. As I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my back against the cold wall, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. There, standing in front of Victor's heavy oak door, was a figure in a dark raincoat. The man was holding a heavy steel crowbar, trying to wedge it between the door and the frame. He was grunting, throwing his weight against the wood, desperate to break the lock. I slowly leaned forward to get a better look at his face. The man turned his head, frustrated by the stubborn lock, and the dim hallway light caught his features perfectly. It was Derek, my own son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man whose debts I had paid off just a year ago, the son who was supposed to be standing by his mother's grave weeping for her loss. Instead, he was here a few miles away, trying to break into the office of the man who had just warned me that my life was in danger. "Derek," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but in that silent corridor it sounded like a gunshot. He froze. The heavy steel crowbar slipped from his gloved hands and clattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed off the walls, a harsh metallic ringing that seemed to vibrate right through my chest. He turned around slowly. His face was pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot. For a second, just a fraction of a second, I saw something in his expression that I had never seen before. It was not surprise. It was panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the panic vanished. His face crumpled. His shoulders heaved and he let out a choked, guttural sob. "Dad!" He cried out, his voice cracking. He stumbled forward, closing the distance between us, and threw his arms around my shoulders. He buried his face in my coat, weeping uncontrollably. I stood there, stiff as a board, my arms hanging uselessly at my sides. The smell of rain and expensive cologne clung to his suit. This was my son, my flesh and blood. But as he clung to me, all I could hear was Victor's terrified voice warning me of danger. "What are you doing here, Derek?" I asked, my tone flat, devoid of the warmth he was probably expecting. "You are supposed to be at the cemetery. You are supposed to be saying goodbye to your mother." He pulled back, wiping his wet face with the back of his hand. "I know, Dad. I know," he stammered, his chest heaving. I could not take it. Watching them lower her into the ground, it broke me. I had to leave. I drove around blindly until I ended up here. "You ended up here with a crowbar trying to break into Victor Thorne's office," I pressed, keeping my eyes locked on his. "Do not lie to me, Derek. Not today." He shook his head frantically, his eyes pleading. "I am not lying, Dad. It is about Mom. A few weeks ago, she told me she kept a private journal, a family diary. She said it had all her favorite memories of us, stories about my childhood. Things she wanted to pass down to my kids one day. She told me she kept it in her personal lockbox inside Victor's office safe." He took a ragged breath, looking down at his shoes, before meeting my gaze again. When I called Victor this morning to ask for it, he was completely dismissive. He told me the safe was company property and I had no right to it. He refused to give it to me, Dad. I just wanted something of hers to hold on to today. I was not trying to steal money. I just wanted my mother's words. I am so sorry. I lost my mind with grief. I looked at him. The tears streaming down his cheeks looked so real. His voice held the exact pitch of a broken, grieving son. And a large part of me, the part that had been a father for 42 years, desperately wanted to believe him. You see, parents have a blind spot when it comes to their children. We will ignore a mountain of red flags if it means preserving the image of the child we raised. 5 years ago, Derek came to me in tears, just like this. His commercial real estate business was on the brink of total collapse. He had made bad investments, trusted the wrong developers, and was facing bankruptcy and potential fraud charges. Martha and I had spent 30 years building my structural engineering firm from a single desk in our garage to a company worth $5 million. It was our retirement, our legacy, but he was my son, so I sold the firm, I took the $5 million, paid off his massive debts, and injected the rest into his company to keep him afloat. Martha was hesitant, but I convinced her. We had enough saved to live comfortably, and I could not watch my own boy lose everything. I had spent my entire life fixing broken structures, and I believed I could fix his broken life too. I wanted to believe that the boy standing in front of me now was just hurting, just making a foolish mistake out of love for his mother. "Put the crowbar away," I said quietly. My voice felt heavy, like I was speaking through a mouthful of sand. He nodded quickly, reaching down to grab the tool. "I am sorry, Dad. I really am. I should go back. Natalie is probably terrified, wondering where I went." "Yes," I said. "Go back to your wife. Go home, Derek. Do not do anything else stupid today. I will speak with Victor about the diary." "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. He hugged me one more time, his grip tight. As he walked past me toward the elevator, I watched his reflection in the glass panels. His posture straightened almost instantly. The trembling in his shoulders stopped. The weeping ceased. He stepped into the elevator, the doors slid shut, and I was left alone in the silent hallway. I turned my attention back to the heavy oak door. The wood around the lock was splintered from Derek's efforts, but the door was actually slightly ajar. The lock had already been disengaged. Derek had not needed to break in. He was just frustrated by a secondary deadbolt, or perhaps he had already finished whatever he aimed to do. I pushed the door open. The hinges whined softly. I stepped into the reception area. The lights were off, the only illumination coming from the gray stormlight, filtering through the large floor-to-ceiling windows. "Victor," I called out. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "Victor, it is Harrison. I am here." There was no answer. I walked past the receptionist's desk and entered his private office. The room was cold. The leather chairs were empty. The large mahogany desk was completely cleared off, save for a single desk lamp. I looked over at the corner where the heavy steel safe was embedded into the wall. The heavy metal door was swung wide open. Victor was nowhere to be found. I stood alone in the dark office, listening to the rain beat against the glass, and realized I was entirely on my own. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, stepping out of the harsh storm and into the deceptive warmth of the foyer. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and roasted chicken. It was a domestic illusion that made my stomach churn. I slowly peeled off my wet coat, hanging it on the brass hook by the door. The sound of the television drifted from the living room, muffled and low. As I walked down the hallway, the hardwood floors creaking familiarly under my weight, Natalie emerged from the kitchen. She was wearing a soft gray cardigan, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun that was undoubtedly styled to look like she had been crying all day. Her eyes were artificially red around the rims. "Harrison," she gasped softly, rushing toward me with her arms extended. "We were so worried. Derek told me you had to leave the cemetery. Are you all right? You look completely frozen." I let her embrace me. Her perfume, a sharp floral scent, filled my nose. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to push her away. I patted her back stiffly. "I am fine, Natalie. It was just too much for me. The rain, the dirt hitting the wood. I had to get away for a while." "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed, pulling back and giving me a look of deep, practiced sympathy. "Derek is upstairs lying down. He is absolutely devastated. Come sit in the kitchen. I made you something warm." I followed her into the brightly lit room. The granite countertops were spotless. On the center island sat a steaming ceramic mug and a thick stack of stapled papers with a sleek silver pen resting on top. "Sit down," she urged, gently pulling out a stool for me. "I brewed your favorite chamomile tea. You need to warm your bones before you catch a cold. And I hate to even bring this up right now, but the funeral director sent over these release forms." I slid onto the stool, my eyes fixed on the mug. Small tendrils of steam rose from the pale yellow liquid. The words from Victor's note flashed in my mind, like a neon sign in a dark room. Do not eat what they give you. I looked at Natalie. She was smiling, but it was a tight, expectant smile. Her gaze flickered briefly from my face to the mug, then to the papers. They need your signature tonight, she explained, her voice dropping to a soft, apologetic whisper. It is just standard paperwork to finalize the burial plot and release the funds to the church. Derek tried to handle it, but since you are the primary account holder, they need your direct authorization. It will only take a second, and then you can go up to bed and rest. I nodded slowly, reaching out and wrapping my cold hands around the warm mug. The heat seeped into my palms, but the chill in my blood remained. I brought the cup close to my face, inhaling the scent. Beneath the sweet, earthy aroma of the chamomile, there was something else. A faint, chalky undertone that I would have never noticed if I had not been looking for it. I lowered the mug without taking a sip. Let me just look these over, I said, reaching into my shirt pocket. I patted my chest, then my pants pockets, adopting a look of mild confusion. Oh, bother. I seem to have left my reading glasses in the truck. Natalie reached across the island and gently tapped the papers with her manicured fingernail. You do not even need to read them, Harrison. It is all standard legal jargon. Just sign at the bottom where the sticky notes are. We want to get this out of the way so you can focus on healing. I cannot sign anything without my glasses, Natalie. I insisted, keeping my voice gentle but firm. My eyes are not what they used to be. I brought the papers closer to my face, squinting hard. I held the thick packet a few inches from my nose, pretending to struggle with the blurry text. But my vision, while certainly aging, was not completely gone. Through the deliberate squint, the bold black letters at the top of the first page came into sharp focus. This was not a funeral release form. There was no mention of a cemetery, a burial plot, or a church. The document was titled Comprehensive General Medical and Financial Power of Attorney. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scanned the dense paragraphs below. It was an absolute surrender. By signing this document, I would be legally declaring myself mentally unfit. I would be granting my son, Derek Ward, irrevocable control over my health care decisions, my bank accounts, my property, and the entire $6 million family trust. I had spent my life building. If I put my name on that dotted line, Derek could sell this house from under my feet, drain my accounts by morning, and lock me away in a care facility before the weekend was over. They were not just stealing from me. They were erasing me. I looked up at Natalie. She was watching me intently, her fingers drumming a silent, impatient rhythm on the granite countertop. Her mask of sympathy was beginning to crack, revealing a cold, calculating anticipation underneath. I needed to destroy the documents, but I could not let her know that I understood what they were. I shifted my weight on the stool, fumbling with the papers awkwardly. As I reached forward to grab the silver pen, I let my elbow strike the side of the heavy ceramic mug. The cup tipped over instantly. The scalding hot laced tea flooded across the kitchen island, a tidal wave of yellow liquid that swallowed the stack of documents. Natalie shrieked, jumping back as the hot liquid ruined the crisp pages. "Oh, I am so incredibly sorry, Natalie," I gasped frantically, grabbing a handful of paper towels from the counter. I clumsily dabbed at the soaked documents, ensuring I smeared the dark ink. My aging hands just betrayed me. I am simply exhausted tonight. Natalie stood there in utter silence, staring at the completely ruined paperwork. The warm mask of the sweet, grieving daughter-in-law vanished instantly. Her jaw clenched so tightly. A small muscle ticked near her left eye. For a terrifying second, I thought she was going to strike me. She took a jagged breath, forcing her shoulders to drop. "It is absolutely fine, Harrison," she said, her voice tight and clipped. "It was just an accident. I will have the funeral director print a new set tomorrow. Head upstairs to bed now. You have had a very long, tragic day." I nodded meekly, keeping my head bowed to hide the sudden, sharp clarity in my eyes. I bid her good night, and slowly made my way up the stairs. I walked into the large master suite I had shared with Martha for several decades. The sweet scent of her vanilla lotion still lingered. I did not turn on the lights. I simply took off my shoes, climbed onto the mattress, and sat quietly in the suffocating darkness. I sat perfectly still for hours, carefully listening to the ambient sounds of the house. The cold wind howling, the distant refrigerator hum. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. If Derek was truly willing to kill his own mother, there was absolutely no limit to what he would do. I had to gather information. I had to become a ghost. Around midnight, I finally heard the heavy thud of Derek's footsteps coming up from the basement, followed by the soft murmur of his voice blending with Natalie's in the kitchen, directly below my room. They were whispering. I slowly pushed myself off the bed. My thick wool socks would muffle my footsteps against the hardwood floors. I crept out of my bedroom, moving with a cautious grace I had not needed since my days as a young engineer. I knew which floorboards groaned and which ones remained silent. I moved down the hallway, pressing my back against the plastered wall. The only light came from the pale moonlight filtering through the storm clouds. As I reached the staircase, the voices from the kitchen became clearer. I descended the stairs, one by one, pausing to listen. "He ruined the papers, Derek." Natalie was hissing, her voice vibrating with a frantic, unhinged panic. "He knocked over that stupid tea on purpose, I swear it." He looked right at me. "He knows something is wrong." "Keep your voice down, Natalie," Derek snapped. His tone was cold, flat, and completely devoid of the weeping, pathetic boy I had seen in the hallway outside Victor's office. "You are being paranoid. He is 74 years old, and he just buried his wife. He is confused, clumsy, and half-blind without his glasses. He does not know anything. He is exactly where we need him to be." "Well, where we need him to be is in a lockdown facility with his name signed on that power of attorney," she fired back. "We are running out of time. The loan sharks called again while you were at the office building. They are giving us until the end of the month. If we do not wire them $2 million by the 30th, they are not going to send another warning text. They are going to show up at our front door." My chest tightened. $2 million. The sheer scale of his debt was staggering. He had not just made bad investments. He had gotten involved with dangerous, violent people. And he was using my life savings to buy his way out of a grave he dug himself. "I will handle the money," Derek said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "You just need to handle the old man. I told you the doctor is coming on Friday at 4 o'clock. We only have a few days to make sure his medical evaluation is completely convincing." "I am trying," Natalie argued, "but the tea trick is too slow. He did not even drink it tonight." "What if he refuses to eat what I cook? What if the symptoms do not present strongly enough when the doctor gets here?" "Then stop playing games with the tea," Derek commanded. "Just double his dosage. Crush the pills directly into his oatmeal in the morning. Put it in his soup at dinner. I do not care if it makes him sick. I do not care if it melts his brain faster. He needs to be completely out of his mind, practically catatonic, by Friday afternoon. The doctor needs to see a man who cannot even remember his own name, let alone manage a $6 million estate." I stood frozen on the staircase, my hand tightly gripping the wooden banister to keep my knees from buckling. The sheer, calculated evil of their conversation washed over me like a bucket of ice water. They were not waiting for me to pass away. They were actively destroying my cognitive function. They were feeding me antipsychotics or sedatives, trying to artificially induce the symptoms of severe dementia. They wanted to erase my memories, my personality, and my dignity. They wanted to turn me into a helpless, drooling shell of a man so a corrupt doctor would quickly declare me legally incompetent. That was their grand strategy. Lock me in a psychiatric ward, take control of the family trust, and leave me to rot away in a chemically induced fog while they freely spent my entire life savings. I turned around and silently crept back up the stairs, my blood running absolutely cold. I knew right then that I had less than 1 week to save my very own life. The sun rose the next morning, casting a pale, cold light through the sheer curtains of my bedroom. I had not slept a single minute. My eyes burned and my chest felt tight, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The paralyzing grief of losing Martha had been violently replaced by an icy, calculated instinct to survive. Long before I was a wealthy business owner, long before I was a husband or a father, I was a structural engineer in the United States Army. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam, building bridges under the cover of darkness and dismantling enemy traps where a single millimeter of error meant instant death. The military taught me that panic is a luxury you cannot afford in a war zone. Patience and precision are your only true weapons. And make no mistake, my own home had just become a war zone. I knew I could not confront Derek and Natalie right now. If I showed any sign of knowing their plan, they would simply accelerate it. I had to play the part they had written for me. I had to become the helpless, declining old man they desperately needed me to be. I slowly got out of bed, purposely leaving my hair uncombed and my pajama shirt partially untucked. I shuffled down the stairs, dragging my feet against the hardwood to make my steps sound heavy and uncertain. When I reached the kitchen, the smell of brown sugar and cinnamon filled the air. Natalie was standing by the stove, humming a cheerful pop song. She turned around, a bright, completely manufactured smile plastered across her face. "Good morning, Harrison," she chimed in, wiping her hands on a floral apron. "Did you sleep well? I prepared a nice warm bowl of oatmeal for you." I stood in the doorway, letting my shoulders slump. I stared at her blankly for a long moment, allowing my mouth to hang open slightly, before I answered. "Where is Martha?" I murmured, keeping my voice raspy and confused. "Why is she not making breakfast?" Natalie's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing her features, before she smoothed it back into fake pity. "Oh, Harrison," she cooed, walking over and placing a gentle hand on my arm. "Martha passed away, remember? We had the funeral yesterday. You just need to sit down and eat. You will feel much better." She guided me to the island stool and placed a steaming ceramic bowl in front of me. Next to the bowl sat a small plastic cup containing my daily blood pressure medication, but there were 3 new unmarked white capsules mixed in. I stared at the pills, letting my hands develop a severe visible tremor. "What are these?" I asked, my voice quivering perfectly. My hands shook so violently that when I reached for the plastic cup, I accidentally knocked it over, spilling the pills across the granite countertop. "Oh goodness, let me help you." Natalie sighed, her tone dripping with thinly veiled irritation. She scooped the pills back into the cup. "Those are your new vitamins. The doctor said you need them for your memory. Take them with your oatmeal. I need to go upstairs and wake Derek. Eat every bite, Harrison. It is important for your health." She turned on her heel and marched out of the kitchen, her footsteps fading up the staircase. The moment she was out of sight, my trembling hands became completely still. I moved with swift, silent precision. I reached into the pocket of my pajama pants and pulled out 3 white peppermint breath mints I had retrieved from my travel bag earlier that morning. They were roughly the same size and shape as the mysterious capsules. I quickly scooped up the 3 unmarked pills from the counter, shoving them deep into my pocket to save for later analysis. I placed the mints into the little cup alongside my actual blood pressure pill. Then I turned my attention to the steaming bowl of oatmeal. Derek had explicitly told her to double the dosage and crush it directly into my food. I could not risk eating even a single spoonful. I grabbed the bowl, walked silently over to the sink, and dumped the entire portion of thick oatmeal straight down the drain. I turned on the faucet running the hot water and flipped the switch for the garbage disposal. The machine roared to life violently, grinding away the poisoned breakfast. To make it look convincing, I grabbed a spoon, smeared a tiny bit of the remaining oatmeal residue around the inside edges of the bowl, and set it back on the kitchen island alongside the empty plastic pill cup. I sat back down on the stool, chewed up my blood pressure pill and the 3 breath mints, and waited. When Natalie returned to the kitchen 10 minutes later, she glanced at the empty bowl and the empty cup. A look of profound satisfaction washed over her face. "Good job, Harrison," she praised me as if she were speaking to a toddler. "Now why do you not go sit in the recliner and watch some television?" I spent the day staring blankly at the television, playing the fool, while meticulously planning my survival. The poisoned pills hidden in my pocket were undeniable proof, but I needed allies. When night finally fell, I waited until the clock struck 2 in the morning. The house was completely silent. Derek and Natalie slept upstairs, certain I was heavily sedated. I dressed quickly in dark clothes. Bypassing the alarmed doors, I crept down into the unfinished basement. I navigated the shadows, perfectly reaching a small egress window hidden behind the furnace. I forced the stiff latch open and squeezed my shoulders through the narrow opening, pulling myself out into the cold grass. I closed it silently. Moving through the dark trees, I had a meeting that would change everything. The crisp night air bit my face as I navigated the woods behind my property. I walked nearly 2 miles through stubble underbrush to reach the county highway. I kept my head down, my heavy work boots sinking deeply into the soft mud, my mind entirely focused on the destination. Earlier, using a prepaid cell phone hidden in my garage, I managed to contact Victor. He gave me an address on the outskirts of town. I reached the wood's edge and stepped onto the highway. Down the road, a neon sign cut through the dark. The motel was a place where people went to disappear. I pulled my collar up and hurried across the lot. I found room number 12 at the very back of the single-story building. I knocked 3 times, paused, and knocked twice more as we had agreed. I heard the scrape of a deadbolt, then the rattle of a chain. The door cracked open just an inch. A tired, bloodshot eye peered out at me from the shadows. The door swung open, and I stepped into the stale, musty air of the cheap motel room. Victor quickly locked the door behind me. I barely recognized him. The man who usually wore bespoke Italian suits and immaculate silk ties was standing before me in a wrinkled dress shirt, his tie undone, his face covered in a thick layer of pale, uneven stubble. He looked entirely broken. "Thank God you made it," Victor breathed out. "I did not know if they were watching your house. I feared you were already trapped." I took a deep breath. "I am out, Victor, but I do not have much time. They think I am sedated, but I must return before sunrise. Tell me exactly what is going on. Tell me what you found in my wife's safe." Victor walked over to a small, wobbly laminate table sitting under a dim lamp. On top of the table was a battered leather briefcase. He clicked the brass locks open with trembling fingers. "Harrison, I need you to brace yourself," he said softly, not meeting my eyes. "When you sold your engineering firm to bail Derek out 5 years ago, you thought he just made some poor real estate investments. We all did. The market was tough, and young developers make mistakes. That is what he sold to us, and that is what we bought." Victor pulled a thick stack of manila folders from the briefcase and laid them flat under the yellow light. But Martha was the sharpest auditor I have ever employed in my entire 30-year career. She never took anything at face value. A few months ago, she noticed some irregularities in the quarterly reports Derek was submitting to the family trust. Small things at first. Discrepancies in material costs, odd billing cycles for his construction contractors. She decided to do a quiet, independent audit of his business accounts. I stepped closer to the table, my eyes scanning the dense spreadsheets and highlighted bank statements. What did she find, Victor? I demanded, my voice hardening. Victor let out a long, heavy sigh. Derek is not a failed real estate developer, Harrison. He is a highly successful money launderer. These documents prove that he set up a complex web of offshore shell companies. He used the $5 million you gave him not to pay off legitimate debts, but to establish a network to wash dirty money for a highly organized, violent criminal syndicate. The loan sharks he owes money to are not typical lenders. They are dangerous cartel associates. And worse, he used your family trust as the ultimate clean front. For the past 2 years, he has been quietly draining your $6 million retirement fund to cover his massive losses when his illegal shipments were seized by the authorities. I stared at the papers, the numbers blurring together, as the horrific reality washed over me. My son was not just a greedy, ungrateful child. He was a deeply entrenched criminal who had risked the lives and livelihoods of his own parents to serve a criminal empire. Every smile, every family dinner, every moment of apparent gratitude was nothing but a calculated performance to keep us completely blind to his massive, sweeping financial crimes. I felt a sudden violent urge to vomit, but I forced it down, clenching my jaw until my teeth ached. He stole everything, I whispered, staring at my own forged signature on dozens of wire transfer authorizations. He stole much more than your money. Harrison Victor said, his voice dropping to a devastated whisper. He handed me one final thin red folder. I opened it. Inside was a printed email and a calendar printout. Martha did not just discover the fraud, Victor explained, tears finally welling in his bloodshot eyes. She documented every single shell company, every forged signature, and every illegal wire transfer. She built an airtight, undeniable criminal case against your son. And because she knew the local police might be compromised or simply unequipped to handle a federal crime of this magnitude, she bypassed them entirely. I looked at the printed email. It was addressed to a senior agent at the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the White-Collar Crime Division. The subject line read, "Urgent evidence of severe wire fraud and money laundering." I looked at the timestamp on the email. It was sent exactly 3 days before she died. Victor placed a shaking hand on my shoulder. She was not just going to the police, Harrison. She had an official confirmed appointment to hand over this exact briefcase to the FBI in federal court. That appointment was scheduled for the very morning she drove her car off the cliff at Miller's Pass. Derek did not just cut her brakes to stop an audit. He murdered his own mother because she was exactly 48 hours away from sending him to federal prison for the rest of his natural life. I stood perfectly still in that damp, dimly lit motel room, the printed email slipping from my trembling fingers and fluttering to the stained carpet below. Murdered. My wife was murdered by the boy she had carried in her womb, the boy whose debts I had drained my savings to pay. I expected the tears to come. I expected my knees to buckle under the crushing weight of a sorrow so immense it should have stopped my heart. But the tears did not fall. The grief that had suffocated me suddenly evaporated, replaced by something entirely different. A cold, quiet, and terrifying stillness washed over my mind. It was a dark, calculated rage, the kind of absolute fury that does not scream, but simply waits in the shadows, sharpening its knives. I looked up at Victor. His eyes were wide with a mixture of profound sorrow and genuine fear as he watched my expression change. "There is more, Harrison," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I need to tell you about the police investigation. I need you to know exactly how he managed to make a blatant murder look like a tragic accident." I nodded slowly, my jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached. "Tell me everything, Victor. Leave nothing out." Victor pulled another folder from the battered leather briefcase. It was a thin gray file containing bank statements and a printed background check. "It is about Detective Mitchell," Victor explained, tapping a glossy photograph of the uniformed officer who had stood in my living room and delivered the news of Martha's death. When her car went off the cliff, Mitchell was the lead investigator assigned to the crash site. He officially signed off on the mechanical failure report, stating that the brake fluid lines had ruptured due to natural wear and tear. He completely ruled out foul play. I stared at the photograph, remembering the solemn, practiced look of sympathy he had worn in my house. How did Derek get to him? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Mitchell has a severe gambling addiction, Victor revealed, sliding a highlighted bank statement across the table. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to an illegal sports betting ring. He was facing the loss of his badge, his pension, and potentially his life. Derek knew this. 2 days after your wife's car was pulled from the ravine, a wire transfer of exactly $100,000 was deposited into an offshore account registered to Mitchell's brother-in-law. The very next morning, Mitchell closed the investigation, sealed the wreckage, and stamped the coroner's report as an accidental death. He sold his badge and your wife's justice for $100,000. The sheer mechanics of the betrayal were staggering. My son had orchestrated a flawless execution. He had identified the one person who could expose his crimes, hired a mechanic to sever the brake lines, and preemptively purchased the investigating officer to ensure the murder was buried forever. He had built a fortress of lies, and he was currently sleeping under my roof, waiting to lock me in a psychiatric ward so he could claim his final prize. Victor watched me closely. "Harrison, what are we going to do?" he asked in a panic. "We cannot go to the local police. Mitchell will intercept any report we make. If we go to the FBI, without absolute proof of the murder plot, Derek will know. He will accelerate his timeline. He will have you committed by Friday, and I will likely end up dead. We are completely trapped." I reached down and picked up the email, placing it into my coat pocket. "We are not trapped, Victor," I said quietly. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, stripped of the warmth of the man I used to be. "Derek thinks he is dealing with a senile old man. He thinks I am an open wallet waiting to be emptied. He has forgotten who raised him. He has forgotten what I did before I sat behind a desk." I turned and walked toward the door. "You stay hidden, Victor. Do not contact anyone. I am going back to play my part. Let them think the drugs are working. Let them think they have won." I stepped out into the freezing night, walking to the edge of the motel parking lot. Under the flickering neon sign, I pulled out a prepaid cell phone. I punched in a number I had memorized decades ago, belonging to a man who lived his life in the shadows. The line rang 3 times before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Yeah," the voice grunted. "Garrett," I said, staring out into the dark highway. "It is Harrison Ward." There was a long pause. "Harrison," the voice replied, the gruffness softening. "It has been a long time, brother. I heard about Martha. I am so sorry." "I do not need your sympathy right now, Garrett," I said flatly. "I need your skills. I need the man you were in the jungle." Garrett Cole was an old military buddy, a man who had served alongside me in the worst combat zones imaginable. After the military, he became a highly specialized private investigator handling corporate espionage. He was a master of gathering dirt on people who thought they were untouchable. "What do you need?" Harrison Garrett asked, shifting into a hardened cadence. "My son murdered my wife," I told him, the words tasting like ash. "He bought a local police detective to cover it up, and now he is drugging me to steal my estate. I have 72 hours to build a steel trap and catch them all. I need you here by morning. Bring everything you have." "Consider it done," Garrett replied. I hung up the phone. The sadness was entirely gone now. I turned toward the dark woods, ready to return to the viper's nest. I slipped back through the basement window just as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed over the horizon. My muscles ached from the cold, but my mind was relentlessly sharp. I crept up the stairs and slipped back into my bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. When Natalie came in a few hours later with another bowl of laced oatmeal, I played my part perfectly. I stared blankly at the wall, knocked my spoon onto the floor, and discarded the pills the moment she turned her back. By 10 o'clock, Derek and Natalie were dressed in somber black clothing. They told me they were attending a memorial luncheon hosted by Martha's friends from the country club. Natalie gave me a condescending pat on the cheek, locked the front door, and their luxury SUV pulled out of the driveway. The moment the sound of their engine faded down the road, the facade dropped. I moved quickly through the house, unlocking the back patio door. 5 minutes later, a shadow detached itself from the tree line. Garrett Cole stepped onto the porch. He wore dark, stealthy clothing and carried a heavy black canvas duffel bag. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of hard miles you only earn in the worst corners of the world, but his eyes were exactly as sharp as I remembered. We did not exchange pleasantries. There was no time for small talk or reminiscing about our time in the service. He stepped inside, dropped the bag onto the hardwood floor, and unzipped it. The bag was filled with high-grade surveillance equipment, the kind of hardware you could not buy in a standard electronics store. He handed me a small schematic pad and asked for the layout of the house. I pointed out the kitchen, the main living area, and most importantly, Derek's home office on the second floor. We went to work with the silent, practiced efficiency of men who had done this 100 times before. Garrett started in the kitchen. He unscrewed the faceplate of the smoke detector above the island, carefully splicing a microscopic camera lens into the wiring so it would draw constant power from the house grid. He positioned it perfectly to capture the granite countertop where Natalie prepared my food and crushed those terrible pills. Then we moved to the living room. Garrett embedded an audio transmitter inside the base of a heavy brass floor lamp near the sofa, a spot where Derek frequently sat to make his evening phone calls. I watched Garrett work, admiring his steady hands. He moved like a ghost, leaving absolutely no trace of his presence. No dust was disturbed, no screws were stripped. The real challenge was Derek's home office. The room was locked, but Garrett picked the heavy brass deadbolt in less than 10 seconds. We stepped inside. The room smelled of expensive scotch and leather. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the space, carrying 3 large computer monitors. Garrett went straight for the tower unit sitting on the floor. He pulled a small black USB drive from his pocket, knelt and plugged it into the back of the machine. He explained in a low whisper that the program would silently copy every keystroke, every deleted file, and every hidden folder, transmitting the data directly to a secure server he had set up in his van miles away. While the computer transferred the data, Garrett climbed onto a leather chair to swap out the air conditioning vent cover, replacing it with an identical one that housed a wide-angle high-definition camera. We were moving on a tight schedule. Garrett's device beeped softly, indicating the data transfer from Derek's computer was nearly 60% complete. We had been in the house for barely 40 minutes. They were supposed to be at the luncheon for at least 3 hours. But the universe rarely respects a perfect plan. Suddenly, the harsh crunch of gravel echoed from the driveway. I froze. I stepped quietly toward the window and peeked through the heavy wooden blinds. Derek's black SUV was parked haphazardly near the front steps. He was alone. Natalie was nowhere in sight. The heavy thud of the front door slamming shut shook the floorboards. "He is inside," I hissed, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "The data transfer," Garrett whispered back, his eyes glued to the glowing progress bar on the computer screen. "It needs 2 more minutes. We cannot pull the drive now, or it will corrupt the entire file system." Heavy, angry footsteps thundered on the stairs. Derek was not just walking. He was storming up the steps, and he was screaming. I could hear his voice echoing off the walls, laced with pure, unadulterated panic. "I told you I need until Friday," Derek roared into his cell phone. "Do you think I am lying to you? The old man is basically a vegetable. The doctor is going to sign the papers and the money will be yours. Just call your dogs off." The loud, heavy footsteps were finally at the top of the stairs, now heading straight for the office. Garrett quickly yanked the drive from the computer with a split second to spare. There was absolutely no time left to run for the hallway or the guest bedroom. I grabbed Garrett tightly by the shoulder and shoved him roughly toward the large walk-in storage closet, situated just behind Derek's massive oak desk. We threw ourselves into the cramped, dark space, pulling the louvered wooden door shut, just as the brass doorknob to the office violently turned. The heavy oak door swung open, smashing forcefully against the drywall. Garrett and I stood shoulder to shoulder in the pitch-black closet, both of us scarcely daring to draw a breath, as Derek paced the room like a caged animal, barking desperate, trembling promises to the merciless killers on the other end of the line. Derek's voice vibrated through the closet door, a desperate sound that betrayed how deep in the criminal underworld he truly was. Garrett and I stood frozen in the stifling darkness, the air growing thick in our lungs. We listened to the heavy thud of Derek pacing back and forth across the rug just inches from where we hid. He slammed his fist violently against the solid oak desktop, causing the room to shudder. "Give me until Friday," he growled into the receiver, his breath ragged. "The doctor will sign the medical power of attorney, and I will have unrestricted access to the trust. You will get every penny I owe you. Just do not come near my house." He ended the call with a sharp press of a button. We heard the clinking of crystal as he poured a measure of scotch, drank it in one gulp, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Garrett and I waited for 10 agonizing minutes in total silence before pushing the door open. We did not exchange a single word. Garrett simply packed his tools, gave me a solemn nod, and slipped out through the second-story window, climbing down the oak trellis to the ground below. I was alone again, but the house was no longer a blind cage. It was fully wired. Every room was now a trap waiting to be sprung. It was time for me to give my son and his wife the performance of a lifetime. When Natalie returned an hour later, she found me sitting cross-legged in the middle of the living room floor. I had purposely untied my shoes, misaligned the buttons on my sweater, and was staring blankly at a television screen that was not even turned on. I let my jaw hang slightly slack, my eyes unfocused. She dropped her purse onto the sofa and let out a loud sigh of pure disgust. "Harrison, what on earth are you doing on the floor?" She snapped, her voice devoid of the sweet tone she used when others were around. I slowly turned my head to look at her, making sure my eyes registered absolutely zero recognition. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. I looked around the room as if I had never seen it before. "Where is my wife? When is Martha coming home from the store? I need to ask Susan to help me find my keys." Susan was the name of a neighbor who moved away 20 years ago. Natalie stopped in her tracks, a wicked smile slowly spreading across her face. She actually believed the heavy doses of antipsychotics had finally broken my brain. "Oh, you are completely gone, are you not?" she mocked, laughing coldly. She walked right past me, intentionally kicking my foot out of her way with her expensive leather boot. "You are absolutely pathetic. An entire life of building buildings and making money, and now you are just a useless idiot sitting on my floor." I let out a soft whimper, curling my shoulders inward like a frightened child. But beneath that cowardly posture, my mind was racing with absolute clarity. I knew the micro-camera hidden inside the smoke detector was capturing every single word of her cruel taunts. Later that evening, the abuse escalated from verbal mockery to physical violence. I was slowly shuffling past the fireplace mantel, dragging my feet heavily against the hardwood floor. Resting on the center of the mantelpiece was a beautiful silver-framed photograph of Martha and me, taken on our 30th wedding anniversary. I reached my hand out, my fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the cool glass of the frame. Suddenly, a sharp, blistering pain erupted across the back of my hand. The loud crack of skin striking skin echoed through the quiet living room. Natalie had marched up right behind me and slapped my hand away with brutal force. My knuckles collided with the heavy brick of the fireplace, scraping the skin raw. "Do not touch that, you crazy old fool," she spat, her eyes flashing with venomous anger. "You are going to break it with your clumsy hands. Go sit in your chair and stare at the wall where you belong." She grabbed me roughly by the shoulder, her fingernails digging painfully through the fabric of my sweater, and shoved me hard toward the leather recliner. I stumbled purposefully, allowing my knees to buckle, and collapsed awkwardly into the chair. I brought my stinging hand to my chest, letting out a pitiful, broken sob, hiding my face in my palms. It was the ultimate humiliation, for a man who had spent his life providing. But as I peered through the gaps in my fingers, staring past her angry face, I looked directly at the small decorative clock on the bookshelf. Inside the number 12 on that dial was another hidden lens. The next morning brought the final undeniable piece of the puzzle. I shuffled into the kitchen at exactly 8 o'clock, playing the part of the obedient broken elder. Natalie was standing at the granite island, her back turned to me as she prepared my breakfast. I paused near the doorway, staying perfectly silent, watching her reflection in the polished stainless steel surface of the double oven. She pulled a heavy marble rolling pin from the bottom drawer. Next to my steaming bowl of scrambled eggs sat the small plastic cup containing my blood pressure pill and the 3 unmarked highly toxic antipsychotic capsules Derek had procured. With a look of absolute cold indifference, she took the heavy marble pin and viciously crushed the white capsules against the granite countertop. She ground them down until they were nothing but a fine powder, and then used the edge of a knife to scrape the toxic poison directly into my food, stirring it thoroughly to hide the evidence. A sick smirk danced on her lips as she carried the poisoned bowl toward me. She had absolutely no idea that the camera installed in the ceiling fixture above her had just captured every single motion in stunning high definition. I waited until she turned her back to load the dishwasher, grabbed the ceramic bowl, and silently scraped the poisoned eggs into a small plastic bag I had hidden in my pocket. I smeared a tiny amount of yolk across the rim of the bowl and left it on the island. When Natalie turned around and saw the empty bowl, her fake, sickeningly sweet smile returned. She praised me like a dog that had performed a trick. I shuffled back to my bedroom, locking the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the mattress. I pulled the prepaid burner phone from beneath the floorboard under my bed. It was just past noon when the screen lit up with an incoming call from Garrett. I answered on the first ring. "Do you have it?" I asked, keeping my voice low and tight. "Yeah, I have it," Garrett replied. His voice was unusually heavy, even for a man who had seen the worst of humanity. I pulled a massive favor with a contact at a private toxicology lab. He ran the 3 white capsules you slipped to me last night through a mass spectrometer. Harrison. I need you to sit down for this. I am sitting, Garrett. Tell me what my son has been feeding me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The sound of Garrett taking a slow, deep breath echoed through the small speaker. "It is a drug called haloperidol," he finally said, pronouncing the clinical name with a cold precision. "But it is an incredibly massive dose. We are talking about 50 milligrams per capsule, Harrison. That is not a vitamin. That is a chemical weapon." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "What exactly does it do, Garrett? What is it supposed to treat?" "Haloperidol is a high-potency, typical antipsychotic," Garrett explained, reading directly from the lab report. "In small, tightly controlled doses, it is used to treat severe schizophrenia or acute psychotic episodes. But giving a dose this massive to a perfectly healthy 74-year-old man is basically a death sentence for your cognitive function. It forcefully blocks the dopamine receptors in your brain. Within days of ingestion, a healthy person will start experiencing severe motor control loss. Your hands will shake uncontrollably. Your speech will become slurred and completely incoherent. You will lose short-term memory, become deeply confused about your surroundings, and stare blankly into space." "It mimics severe Alzheimer's disease," I whispered, the horrifying reality clicking into place like the final tumbler of a lock. "Exactly," Garrett confirmed, his voice laced with disgust. "It creates a picture-perfect textbook case of rapid-onset dementia. Any doctor who walks into that house and observes you under the influence of this chemical cocktail will immediately diagnose you as mentally incompetent. But it gets much worse, Harrison." I closed my eyes, bracing myself against the cold wall of my bedroom. "Tell me." "Haloperidol is not just a temporary sedative," Garrett continued. "At the extreme dosage Natalie has been slipping into your food, the effects are not entirely reversible. Prolonged exposure causes severe neurotoxicity. It begins to systematically kill the neurons in your brain. If you had actually been eating those poisoned meals every day by the time Friday rolled around, you would not just be acting like you had dementia. You would actually have permanent, irreversible brain damage. You would spend the rest of your life trapped inside a broken mind, completely unable to care for yourself, unable to remember your own name, and entirely dependent on the very people who destroyed you. The line fell silent. The only sound in the room was the heavy, ragged sound of my own breathing. I lowered the phone slightly, staring out the bedroom window at the gray, overcast sky. My mind raced back to the day Derek was born. I remembered holding him in the hospital room, looking down at his tiny, fragile hands, and promising to protect him from the cruelties of the world. I remembered working 16-hour shifts on construction sites in the freezing rain, saving every spare dollar so he could attend a prestigious private university without a single student loan. I gave him my youth, my energy, and my $5 million company. And in return, he was secretly feeding me a chemical designed to melt my brain. He was not just stealing my money. That would have been simple greed. A thief takes your wallet and runs away. But Derek was doing something infinitely more sinister. He was actively, methodically erasing my humanity. He wanted to trap me in a living nightmare, turning me into a drooling, senseless husk, just so he could casually sign his name on my bank accounts and pay off his criminal debts. The profound evil of his plan was almost too massive to comprehend. He had murdered my wife to silence her, and now he was destroying my mind to steal my legacy. Harrison Garrett's voice pulled me back from the dark abyss of my thoughts. "Are you still there?" "I am here, Garrett." I answered, my voice terrifyingly calm. It was the absolute calm of a man who had nothing left to lose. "We have everything we need," Garrett said. The camera in the kitchen recorded her crushing the pills. The audio feed caught Derek ordering her to double the dosage. And now we have the toxicology report proving it is a lethal neurotoxic poison. This is premeditated attempted murder, Harrison. We can call the FBI right now. We can end this today. "No," I commanded softly. "If we arrest them now, Derek will hire the best defense lawyers in the state. He will claim he bought the wrong supplements. He will claim ignorance. He will drag this through the courts for years. And Detective Mitchell might catch wind of it and destroy the evidence regarding Martha's crash. We stick to the plan." "Are you absolutely sure you want to wait until Friday?" Garrett asked, clearly concerned for my safety. "I am completely sure," I replied. "They want to put on a show for this corrupt doctor. They want a grand finale where I am declared incompetent and they win the grand prize. I am going to give them their show. But I am writing the final act." I ended the call and slid the phone back under the floorboard. I stood up and walked over to the mirror hanging above the dresser. I looked at my reflection. The tired, grieving widower was completely gone. In his place stood a man forged in the fires of absolute betrayal. My son was trying to destroy my mind, but he had only succeeded in waking up a monster he could never hope to defeat. Friday was exactly 3 days away, and hell was coming with me. Wednesday morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. I continued to play the broken, sedated old man, shuffling aimlessly and staring blankly out the windows. Natalie watched me with a mix of disdain and triumph, entirely convinced her chemical cocktail was working flawlessly. Little did she know I was mentally mapping their downfall. At exactly 2 o'clock, while Natalie showered, the burner phone vibrated against my thigh. I retreated to my bedroom, locked the heavy wooden door, and answered the call. It was Garrett. His voice crackled over the secure line, humming with a tense electric energy. He had spent the last 24 hours relentlessly hammering against the firewall of Derek's home server. The USB drive we plugged into his computer was not just copying files. It was actively sniffing out his keystrokes, hunting for the master password to his encrypted storage drives. Garrett told me the encryption was military grade, something Derek must have purchased from his underground connections. But Garrett was a ghost in the machine, a man who had broken into overseas intelligence servers during our time working alongside government agencies. I finally cracked the main vault. Harrison Garrett said, the rapid clicking of a keyboard echoing loudly in the background. The keystroke logger caught him logging into a hidden administrative account late last night. Once I had the passphrase, I bypassed the local network firewall and established a secure remote tunnel directly into his hard drive. I am inside his entire digital life right now, and what I am seeing is absolutely staggering. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floorboards. Tell me what is in there, Garrett. I need to know exactly how deep this infection goes. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Garrett let out a low whistle. It is a massive financial graveyard, he muttered. He is running a sophisticated international laundering operation. I am looking at spreadsheets detailing wire transfers to offshore accounts. He set up dozens of dummy corporations, construction companies that never built a single house, consulting firms that have no employees. They are all just empty vessels designed to clean millions of dollars in illicit cash. And the worst part is how he funded the initial infrastructure. He used your family trust as the primary collateral to open the offshore credit lines. He bled my accounts dry to finance his criminal enterprise, I stated, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Yes, Garrett confirmed. Every time he suffered a loss, every time a shipment was intercepted or a deal went bad, he drained funds directly from your retirement accounts to cover his tracks and keep the loan sharks away. But he was smart about it. He never transferred the money straight to his personal bank. He funneled it through a complex web of cryptocurrency wallets. I am tracking the digital ledger right now. He converted your life savings into untraceable digital coins, bounced them across dozens of anonymous servers around the world, and then deposited them into his hidden accounts. It is a financial maze designed to confuse any standard forensic accountant. But Martha was not a standard accountant. She must have caught a minor discrepancy in the initial withdrawal patterns and followed the thread all the way to the digital exchanges. That is why she was putting together that physical briefcase for the federal authorities. She had the physical bank statements that proved where the initial seed money came from. Derek knew that if she handed those documents over, the authorities would easily obtain subpoenas for the exchange platforms and tear his entire digital fortress down to the ground. Keep digging, Garrett. I urged my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my chest. If he is meticulous enough to build this kind of network, he is meticulous enough to keep records of everything. Check the deleted files. People like Derek always think dragging a file to the trash bin makes it disappear forever. They never realize that the data still exists on the physical drive until it is overwritten. You are reading my mind, Garrett replied. I am running a deep recovery scan on the unallocated space of his hard drive right now. It takes a massive amount of processing power, but my rigs are chewing through it. I am pulling up thousands of fragmented files, old emails, encrypted chat logs, digital receipts for burner phones. It is like sifting through the ashes of a burned-down building. Wait. Garrett stopped speaking. The rapid clicking of his keyboard suddenly ceased. The silence stretched out thick and heavy with anticipation. Garrett. What is it? I demanded. Gripping the phone so tightly, my knuckles throbbed. What did you find? Give me a second, he murmured, his voice sounding distant, as if he was leaning close to his monitor. He had a secondary hidden partition on the drive. It was masked to look like a corrupted system folder. I just bypassed the permissions, Garrett continued. It is a completely isolated directory. There are no financial documents in here. It is just a single lonely folder tucked away in the darkest corner of his server. I felt a cold chill wash over my skin. What is inside the folder, Garrett? Tell me right now. I heard the faint click of a computer mouse. It is an audio file, Harrison. Just one single MP3 recording. The file size is small, maybe only 2 or 3 minutes long at most. But it is the file name that has my attention. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped animal desperate to escape. Read the name, I ordered, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. I heard Garrett swallow hard over the phone. The metadata shows. It was created exactly 4 days before Martha died. He explained, his tone completely devoid of any emotion, adopting the clinical detachment of a soldier delivering a casualty report. The file is titled mechanic_deposit. Play it, I ordered. My voice was no longer my own. It was a hollow, scraped-out sound, like wind blowing through an empty canyon. I pressed the phone so hard against my ear that the plastic casing dug painfully into my skin. I needed to hear every syllable. I needed the undeniable truth burned into my mind so that I would never again feel a shred of pity for the boy I raised. I heard Garrett click his mouse. A harsh burst of static hissed through the small speaker, followed by the heavy rhythmic thrum of background noise. It sounded like an auto repair shop. I could hear the faint whine of a pneumatic drill and the clang of metal striking metal. Then a voice cut through the industrial hum. It was Derek. His tone was casual, laced with a terrifying arrogance. "Look, I do not care how you do it," Derek said, his voice crystal clear despite the ambient noise. "Just make sure it is completely untraceable. I am paying you a premium for a clean job." A second voice grunted in response. This voice was raspy, thick with a lifetime of cheap cigarettes. "It is a 1998 Volvo," the mechanic replied. "The undercarriage is practically rusted through anyway. It will not take much to make it look like a tragic structural failure. I can weaken the primary fluid lines. Once she hits a steep incline and rides the pedal, the pressure will blow the seals completely. She will not have any stopping power." "Good," Derek responded without a single beat of hesitation. He was discussing the murder of his own mother with the same casual indifference he used to order a cup of coffee. "Cut the brake lines on the Volvo. Make it look like old age wear and tear. My mother drives it to the hills every Sunday. Just get it done." The recording clicked off, leaving nothing but the dead, heavy silence of my locked bedroom. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. The device felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the edge of the mattress, my chest heaving as if the air had been violently sucked from the room. I tried to take a breath, but my throat closed up. A guttural, agonizing sound tore its way out of my lungs, a primal cry of absolute devastation that I had to muffle by burying my face deeply into a thick woolen pillow. The pain was physical. It felt as though a jagged blade had been driven directly through my sternum and twisted without mercy. The son I had built an empire for the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged the child I had taught to fish in the quiet waters of Lake Sinclair, had cold-bloodedly ordered the assassination of the woman who gave him life. And he did it for money. He did it to protect a criminal laundering operation. Martha had loved him with an endless, forgiving grace. She had baked him his favorite chocolate cake for his 40th birthday just a few years ago. She had framed his college diploma and hung it proudly in our hallway. And he had sent her careening off a mountain road, knowing she would be terrified in her final moments, desperately pumping a dead brake pedal as her car plunged toward the jagged rocks below. I saw her face in my mind, her warm smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed at my terrible jokes. I imagined her final seconds of sheer terror, the crushing impact, the sound of tearing metal, the absolute darkness that followed. And knowing that Derek probably smiled when he received the phone call from the police, I threw the pillow across the room. It struck the wall with a dull thud. My hands began to shake, not with the fake tremors of a poisoned old man, but with a violent volcanic rage that consumed every ounce of sorrow left in my body. The tears stopped falling. The grief evaporated. In its place, a dark, terrifying clarity settled over me. I stood up from the bed. I walked over to the closet and caught my reflection in the full-length mirror on the door. My eyes were red and swollen, but they were hard, cold, unforgiving. I picked up the phone again. Garrett was still on the line, maintaining a respectful, heavy silence. He knew what I was going through. He knew there were no words of comfort that could possibly heal the wound of a betrayed father. Harrison Garrett finally whispered, his voice thick with sorrow. "I am so sorry. I am so damn sorry." I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the icy resolve lock into place. "Do not be sorry, Garrett," I replied. My voice was steady now. The tremor was gone. The hesitation was completely erased. "Keep that audio file secure. Back it up on 3 different servers. Print the bank statements showing the deposit he made to that mechanic. Print the offshore accounts, the crypto ledgers, everything. I want a mountain of physical evidence ready by tomorrow night." "Are we still waiting for the doctor on Friday?" Garrett asked, clearly eager to burn the house down right now. "Yes," I answered, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "They want to play a game of deception. They want to trap me in a corner and strip me of everything I own. But the gloves are completely off now. He crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. I am not just going to send my son to prison. I am going to utterly destroy him. I am going to take away his freedom, his wife, his dignity, and his false reputation. I will reduce his entire life to ash. Friday is Judgment Day, and I am going to be the judge, the jury, and the absolute executioner. He will pay for this." Thursday arrived wrapped in a suffocating tension. The air inside the house felt thick, poisoned by the unspoken secrets festering within its walls. I spent the entire day confined to the living room recliner, wrapped in a heavy woven blanket, staring vacantly at the muted television screen. My performance had to be absolutely flawless now. I let my head loll slightly to the side, my mouth hanging open just a fraction. Natalie passed by several times, casting sneering glances in my direction. She did not even bother to hide her contempt anymore. At lunch, she served me a bowl of lukewarm soup, aggressively stirring in the crushed powder of the haloperidol right in front of me, assuming I was too far gone to comprehend what she was doing. I simply smiled, a vacant, toothy smile, waited for her to walk away to answer her phone, and carefully dumped the toxic mixture into a plastic Ziploc bag hidden under my blanket. I was a man trapped behind enemy lines, surrounded by hostile forces, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the hardwood floors, Derek returned home from his office. He did not acknowledge me. He simply walked past my chair, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway, and headed straight for the liquor cabinet. Shortly after 8 at night, the doorbell rang. Natalie rushed to open it, her voice dropping to a hushed, conspiratorial whisper. I recognized the heavy, authoritative tread of the boots stepping into the foyer. It was Detective Mitchell, the very man who had stood over my wife's freshly dug grave and lied to my face. I remained perfectly still in my chair, regulating my breathing, keeping my eyes fixed on the television screen as they moved past the living room and into Derek's private study. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. I waited exactly 3 minutes to ensure they were settled. Then, moving with the silent, practiced stealth of a ghost, I slipped out of my recliner and crept up the stairs to my locked bedroom. I pulled the burner phone from beneath the floorboards, plugged in a pair of cheap, wired earphones, and connected to the secure audio feed Garrett had established. The microscopic microphone hidden inside the air conditioning vent of Derek's office picked up the conversation with terrifying clarity. I heard the clinking of ice against crystal glasses, the sound of expensive scotch being poured. "Well, everything is set on my end," Detective Mitchell said, his voice deep and rumbling, completely lacking the professional polish he used when wearing his uniform in public. "The paperwork for the accidental death ruling is permanently filed in the county archives. Nobody is ever going to open that case again. You have my absolute guarantee." I appreciate that Mitchell. Derek replied, his tone smooth and entirely devoid of remorse. "You will get the second half of your payment deposited into the offshore account by Monday morning. But right now we need to focus on the final phase of this operation. Tomorrow is the most critical day. We cannot afford a single mistake." Mitchell grunted in agreement. "Tell me exactly how this is going to play out." "I am putting my badge on the line by showing up here tomorrow. If the old man puts up a fight and the neighbors hear him screaming, things could get incredibly complicated very quickly." "He is not going to put up a fight," Natalie chimed in, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "I have been pumping him full of high-grade antipsychotics all week. His brain is completely fried. He can barely remember how to hold a spoon, let alone organize any kind of physical resistance. He is just a drooling vegetable at this point." "Even so," Derek interrupted, "we have to make sure the legal framework is completely bulletproof. That is why the doctor is arriving at exactly 4 in the afternoon tomorrow. I paid a premium to get a psychiatrist who understands discretion. He has a history of signing expedited involuntary commitment forms for wealthy families who want to quietly dispose of their problematic relatives. He will conduct a brief, superficial evaluation. Once he sees the old man's induced symptoms, he will officially declare him an immediate physical danger to himself and others." I listened to my son calmly detail my destruction, my hands balling into tight fists. "Once the doctor signs the medical evaluation," Derek continued, "the blanket power of attorney becomes completely active. I will have total unchallenged legal control over his medical decisions, his physical property, and the entire $6 million family trust. Then the private medical transport team will arrive at the back door. They will strap him to a gurney and take him directly to the lockdown ward at the Oak Ridge Psychiatric Facility." "And where do I fit into this grand performance?" Mitchell asked, the clinking of his glass punctuating his sentence. "You are my insurance policy," Derek stated coldly. "You will arrive at 3:45 just before the doctor. You will be in full uniform. Your presence will provide the official police authority required for an involuntary extraction. If the medical transport team questions anything, or if the old man suddenly has a moment of clarity and tries to resist, you are there to authorize the use of physical restraints. You will tell anyone who asks that you are responding to a distress call about a violent, dementia-ridden patient. You will ensure he goes quietly into that van, and you will ensure the neighbors do not ask any questions." Mitchell let out a low chuckle. "It is a bold move, Derek. I have to hand it to you. You are putting your own father in a padded cell to get to his checkbook. Does it not bother you even a little bit?" There was a brief silence on the audio feed. I held my breath, waiting for the answer, foolishly hoping to hear a single shred of hesitation from the boy I raised. "He had a good run," Derek finally answered, his voice devoid of a single ounce of humanity. "But he is a dinosaur, Mitchell. He is sitting on a mountain of wealth while my business is suffocating. I am just accelerating the natural order of things. By tomorrow night he will be locked away in a room where nobody will ever listen to him again, and I will be a very wealthy man. Now finish your drink. We have a big day tomorrow." The audio feed cut to a low static hum. I pulled the earphones out, letting them drop onto the floorboards. The darkness of my bedroom felt suffocating, yet strangely focusing at the same time. It was Thursday night. The digital clock resting on my nightstand glowed with an eerie green light, marking the steady passage of time. I had less than 24 hours to prepare the absolute ultimate counterattack against the two people I once loved. My son firmly believed he was sending me to a living hell, but he was completely unaware that I had already built his. Friday morning broke with a deceptive stillness. The storm that had raged for days had finally broken, leaving behind a pale, washed-out sky that offered no real warmth. I lay in my bed, staring up at the intricate patterns of the plaster ceiling, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the day pressing down on my chest. Today was the day. It was the culmination of 48 years of marriage, decades of hard work, and a lifetime of fatherhood, all funneling down into a single brutal afternoon. I carefully rolled out of bed, my joints popping in the quiet room. Before I changed out of my pajamas, I reached into the hidden seam of my travel bag. Garrett had left me a parting gift, during his covert visit. It was a micro earpiece no larger than a grain of rice designed for deep cover operatives. I pushed it deep into my right ear canal until it was completely invisible to the naked eye. I tapped the small transmitter taped to my rib cage twice. A tiny burst of static buzzed in my ear, followed immediately by Garrett's steady, reassuring voice. "I have you on audio," Harrison Garrett whispered. "Testing 1, 2. Can you hear me clearly?" I coughed once to confirm. "Good," Garrett continued. "The perimeter is fully established. I have 2 unmarked surveillance vans parked down the street. We have eyes on the front and back of your property. I am sitting with Special Agent Vance from the Federal Bureau. He has reviewed the audio file of your son ordering the hit on Martha, along with the offshore bank records and the toxicology reports. They are treating this as an active, high-priority takedown. They are just waiting for my signal to breach the doors. Victor is safe in federal protective custody. You are not alone in this, my friend. Just play the part a little while longer." I took a slow, deep breath, letting the tension bleed out of my shoulders. I ruffled my hair, untucked one side of my shirt, and shuffled out of the bedroom, dragging my left foot slightly to complete the illusion of a man whose nervous system was actively shutting down. I entered the kitchen. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a cruel reminder of the mornings Martha and I used to spend reading the newspaper together at the island. Natalie was already dressed, wearing a sharp, professional black dress. She was treating today like a formal business transaction. She did not even look up from her phone when I walked in. I slumped into my chair, letting my head hang forward. A few minutes later, she placed a piece of dry toast and a cup of water in front of me. She did not bother with the laced pills this morning. She clearly believed the accumulated dosage was already more than enough to achieve their desired result. "Eat it and keep quiet," she muttered, typing furiously on her screen. She was probably texting the transport team finalizing the logistics of my impending kidnapping. I stared blankly at the toast, letting a small trail of saliva pool at the corner of my mouth. I had to be absolutely convincing. Around noon, Derek finally emerged from his office. He was dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his hair perfectly combed. He looked like a man preparing to accept an award. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and leaned against the granite counter, studying me with a look of profound, clinical detachment. He watched me for a long time, sipping his coffee, his eyes tracking my vacant, unblinking stare. I did not react. I focused all my attention on the intricate grain of the wooden table, slowing my breathing, completely ignoring his presence. Derek set his mug down and slowly walked over to my chair. He crouched down so his face was level with mine. I could smell the sharp, expensive mint on his breath. He reached out and condescendingly patted my cheek, his fingers cold against my skin. "Do not worry," old man Derek whispered, a cold, triumphant smile stretching across his face. "You will be in a nice, padded room soon, and I will take good care of your money. You worked so hard all your life, but you just do not have the mind for it anymore. It is time for you to rest. I will make sure the doctors give you the good medication. You will not even know you are locked up. It will be like a long, peaceful sleep." He patted my cheek one last time, stood up, and walked out of the room whistling a cheerful tune. My hands remained perfectly still in my lap, but inside my mind was a raging inferno. I wanted to leap out of the chair, wrap my hands around his throat, and squeeze until that arrogant, murderous smile was wiped from his face forever. I wanted to demand how he could look into my eyes knowing he had slaughtered his own mother, saw it for a handful of digital currency. But I held my ground. I clamped down on my fury with the iron discipline of a soldier. Every second I maintained this charade was another nail in his coffin. Through the earpiece, I heard Garrett's voice cut through my dark thoughts. "Hold steady, Harrison," Garrett murmured, his voice tight with restrained anger. I heard what he said through the living room microphones. "The federal agents in the van are practically foaming at the mouth. We have enough to put him away for 3 lifetimes. Just let the trap snap shut completely. We need the corrupt doctor and the detective in the room. We want to catch the entire network in one clean sweep. I tapped my fingers twice against my thigh, a silent acknowledgement that I understood the plan. The afternoon stretched on with agonizing slowness. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. The house was completely silent, yet thick with anticipation. Natalie paced the floor, adjusting the throw pillows on the sofa, arranging a tray of water glasses for the impending guests. She was setting the stage for my legal execution. I sat in the recliner for hours, motionless, a ghost haunting my own home. I observed the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the living room windows. I thought about the sheer amount of love that had built this space. Martha had picked out these heavy velvet curtains. She had chosen the warm amber color of the hardwood floors. She had poured her soul into creating a sanctuary for our family, a place of safety and warmth. And now the very son she nurtured was using her sanctuary as the staging ground for a calculated clinical betrayal. The juxtaposition of the beautiful environment and the grotesque evil unfolding within it was almost too much to bear. It took a monumental effort of will to keep my face completely slack, to keep my eyes devoid of the sharp, burning intelligence that was currently tracking every single movement in the house. At 2 o'clock, Derek began arranging documents on the coffee table. I watched him from my peripheral vision. He laid out the thick, multi-page medical evaluation forms the corrupt psychiatrist would sign. Next to them, he placed the comprehensive financial power of attorney, the document that would legally strip me of my identity, my property, and my life savings. He smoothed the papers with a terrifying reverence, checking his gold wristwatch every few minutes. He was practically vibrating with greed. The sheer audacity of his plan was staggering. He truly believed he had thought of everything. He believed he had outsmarted the police, outmaneuvered the auditors, and successfully neutralized his own father. Garrett's voice crackled in my ear, again low and urgent. Target 1 is approaching. Detective Mitchell just turned onto your street in his marked cruiser. He is parking 2 houses down to keep a low profile. He is walking toward your front door now. I did not move a muscle. I kept my gaze fixed on a blank spot on the wall. The doorbell chimed a cheerful sound that felt entirely wrong for the moment. Derek strode confidently to the door and pulled it open. Mitchell stepped inside, his heavy-duty boots thudding against the floorboards. He was in full uniform, his brass badge catching the afternoon light. He looked around the foyer, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. Is the package ready? Mitchell asked, his voice low and gruff. Derek smiled, gesturing toward me where I sat slumped in the chair. He is completely docile, Derek assured him. The medication has him perfectly compliant. When the doctor gets here, we run through the questions quickly, sign the papers, and the transport team will load him into the van. You just stand by the door and look official. Mitchell walked over and stood directly in front of me, staring down with a look of mild disgust. He waved a hand in front of my face. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I just stared straight through his chest. He really is gone, Mitchell muttered. It is almost sad to look at. I listened to the man who covered up my wife's murder pity me, and I felt a cold, hard smile form in the deepest, darkest corner of my mind. It was 3:45 in the afternoon. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the stench of corruption and impending victory. They thought the game was already won. They thought I was a broken, mindless obstacle they had successfully removed. But they had no idea that the house was wired. They had no idea that federal agents were watching their every move from the street. The calm before the storm was finally over. The sky was turning dark outside the windows, and I was entirely ready to bring the thunder. Exactly at 4 o'clock, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the silent house. Derek swiftly crossed the foyer and opened it. A tall, impeccably dressed man stepped inside carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He had silver hair swept back perfectly, and wore a pair of expensive, wire-rimmed glasses. This was Dr. Eris Thorne, the corrupt psychiatrist Derek had purchased to deliver my final sentence. He did not look like a man who locked innocent people in padded cells for profit. He looked like a respectable pillar of the medical community. Derek shook his hand warmly, thanking him for making the trip on such short notice. Natalie hovered nearby, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the exhausted caregiver perfectly. Detective Mitchell remained standing by the front door, his arms crossed over his chest, his radio crackling softly. The entire cast of my destruction was finally gathered under one roof. Dr. Thorne walked into the living room and took a seat on the velvet sofa directly across from my recliner. He opened his briefcase with a sharp metallic click and extracted a thick file folder along with a silver fountain pen. He crossed his legs, resting the folder on his knee, and looked over at me with an expression of practiced, artificial sympathy. "Harrison," he said, his voice smooth and incredibly soothing. "My name is Dr. Thorne. Your family called me here today because they are deeply concerned about your well-being. They tell me you have been struggling lately, forgetting things, acting a bit confused. Can you tell me how you are feeling today?" I kept my head lolled to the side, my chin resting near my collarbone. I allowed my mouth to hang open, breathing in shallow gasps. I stared vacantly at the cuff of the doctor's expensive suit, keeping my eyes completely unfocused. When I did not answer, the doctor leaned forward, adopting a slower, louder tone, as if speaking to a child. "Harrison, can you tell me what day of the week it is? Can you tell me the name of the current president?" I let out a low, guttural moan, letting a thin line of saliva escape the corner of my mouth and drip down my chin. I brought my trembling right hand up, pawing weakly at the air, as if trying to swat an invisible insect. I mumbled a string of completely incoherent syllables, ensuring my voice cracked and faded into a pitiful whimper. Natalie stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the doctor's shoulder. "It breaks my heart to see him like this," she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "It has been a rapid decline since Martha passed away. He does not even know who we are anymore. He wanders the house at night. We are terrified he is going to leave the stove on or wander out into the street and get himself killed. We simply cannot provide the level of round-the-clock care he desperately needs." Dr. Thorne nodded gravely, making a brief dismissive note on his legal pad. "It is a tragically common presentation in severe trauma cases among the elderly," he stated, his tone clinical and devoid of any genuine emotion. "The shock of losing a spouse can often trigger a latent neurodegenerative cascade. Given the extreme lack of motor control, the aphasia, and the complete dissociation from his immediate reality, it is my professional medical opinion that he poses an immediate and severe danger to his own safety. He is profoundly incapable of making rational decisions regarding his medical care or his financial estate." Derek let out a loud sigh of relief, rubbing his face to simulate the heavy burden of a loving son making a difficult choice. "So you agree that involuntary commitment is the only safe option left for him?" Derek asked, his voice thick with fake hesitation. "I absolutely agree," Dr. Thorne confirmed without a single second of hesitation. "It is the most compassionate course for everyone involved. He will be safe in our lockdown ward. He will be monitored 24 hours a day, and you will have the peace of mind knowing he cannot harm himself." Derek reached onto the coffee table and picked up the thick stack of legal documents. These were the papers that would end my life as a free man. He handed them across the table to the psychiatrist. The top page was the medical evaluation mandate, and right beneath it lay the comprehensive financial power of attorney. "If you could just sign on the dotted lines," Dr. Derek said, unable to hide the trembling anticipation in his voice. "Once your signature is on these pages, the transport team is waiting in a van just around the corner. They can secure him immediately." The room fell silent. The only sound was the heavy rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and the soft crackle of Detective Mitchell's police radio near the front door. Dr. Thorne took the documents, and placed them flat against his leather briefcase. He uncapped his silver fountain pen, the nib catching the pale afternoon light streaming through the living room windows. He quickly reviewed the printed text, verifying that Derek's legal team had drafted the clauses to his exact specifications. He nodded in approval. Derek took a step closer, his eyes locked hungrily on the tip of the pen. Natalie held her breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her chest. Mitchell shifted his weight, resting his hand on his duty belt, ready to intervene if I magically found the strength to resist the transport team. The silver pen hovered just a fraction of an inch above the crisp white paper. The trap was perfectly set. The bait had been taken. As the dark ink kissed the signature line, I sat straight up in my chair, my spine snapping rigid, and locked my eyes directly onto Derek's face with terrifying clarity. Before the ink could bleed into the fibers of the paper, I shattered the illusion. I sat straight up in my leather recliner, throwing off the heavy woven blanket that had draped over my shoulders like a funeral shroud. My spine snapped rigid, aligning with a satisfying pop. The slack, drooling expression I had meticulously worn for days vanished in a single microsecond, replaced by a cold, sharp, and commanding glare. I reached up with a perfectly steady hand and wiped the pathetic trail of saliva from my chin. I took a deep, full breath of air, filling my lungs completely, for the first time in what felt like an absolute eternity. The suffocating fog of the victim was gone. The architect had returned. I was no longer the prey. "Before you sign that, Dr. Thorne, you might want to look at the screen," I commanded. My voice did not waver. It did not crack. It was the deep, booming, authoritative baritone of a man who had commanded vast construction crews and built massive steel skyscrapers. It was a voice that demanded absolute, unquestioning obedience. The effect on the room was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. Dr. Thorne flinched violently, his hand jerking back as if the crisp white paper itself had suddenly caught fire. The expensive silver fountain pen clattered onto the glass surface of the coffee table, leaving a dark, jagged smudge of black ink across the fraudulent legal documents. The papers were ruined. Natalie gasped a sharp, choked sound of pure terror and took a stumbling step backward. She clamped both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at me in absolute horror, as if a buried corpse had just sat up in its coffin. Derek froze entirely. The triumphant, greedy smile that had been plastered across his face just seconds ago melted away, leaving behind a pale, bloodless mask of sheer panic. He stood rooted to the hardwood floor, his jaw working silently, completely unable to process the impossible reality unfolding in front of him. Detective Mitchell instinctively dropped his heavy hand to the leather holster of his service weapon, his police training kicking in, though he had absolutely no idea what threat he was supposed to be facing in this upscale, quiet living room. "What is happening here?" Dr. Thorne stammered, his professional composure shattering into a million jagged pieces. He looked frantically from me to Derek and back again, his silver hair suddenly looking disheveled. "I thought you explicitly said he was completely incapacitated." "He is having a lucid episode," Derek blurted out. His voice pitched an octave higher than normal, desperate to regain control of his rapidly crumbling narrative. "It happens sometimes with severe dementia patients. They get a sudden, unpredictable burst of clarity before they crash again. Just ignore his ramblings and sign the papers." "Doctor, please, we need to get this done right now. We cannot wait any longer." I slowly reached into the pocket of my trousers and pulled out the small black remote control for the massive 85-inch television mounted on the wall directly above the brick fireplace. I did not break eye contact with my trembling son. "You are right about one thing, Derek," I said, my words dripping with an absolute freezing venom. "I am experiencing a moment of profound clarity. In fact, I have never seen things more clearly in my entire long life." I pressed the red power button. The heavy black screen on the wall flickered, groaned softly with electrical current, and roared to bright life. I pressed a second button, instantly syncing the television to the secure wireless server Garrett was operating from the surveillance van parked down the street. The massive screen brightened, casting a harsh, glaring white light across the terrified faces of the people gathered in my living room. The image that suddenly appeared was crystal clear, high-definition video footage captured just 2 days prior. It was a perfect, unobstructed overhead angle of the granite kitchen island. The room fell into a dead, horrifying silence as the video began to play. There, larger than life on the screen, was Natalie. She was humming a cheerful pop tune, holding a heavy marble rolling pin in her right hand. Beside her sat a steaming ceramic bowl of my morning scrambled eggs and a small plastic cup holding 3 unmarked white capsules. The evidence was right there. The hidden microphone spliced into the ceiling smoke detector had picked up the audio flawlessly. The sound of her humming echoed loudly through the premium surround sound speakers in the living room. Everyone watched in paralyzed, sickening shock as the digital version of my daughter-in-law casually took the 3 capsules, smashed them brutally under the marble rolling pin, and ground them into a fine, powdery dust. Then her recorded voice rang out from the television, cruel and dripping with pure malice. "Oh, you are completely gone, are you not?" the voice mocked. "You are absolutely pathetic. An entire life of building buildings and making money, and now you are just a useless idiot sitting on my floor." The video showed her scraping the toxic white powder directly into my breakfast, stirring it vigorously with a silver spoon to hide the deadly evidence. Then the footage seamlessly cut to a second clip. This time it was from the micro camera hidden inside the decorative living room clock. It showed me weakly reaching for the framed photograph of Martha on the mantelpiece, and it showed Natalie storming across the room, violently slapping my hand away with brutal force and shoving me forcefully into the leather recliner. "Do not touch that, you crazy old fool," her recorded voice screamed at maximum volume. I clicked the remote, freezing the frame on Natalie's contorted, incredibly angry face. The silence that followed in the living room was thick and suffocating. I turned my attention back to the corrupt psychiatrist, who was now trembling visibly, his face completely devoid of color. He was staring at the television screen with an expression of absolute, undeniable horror. That white powder she was crushing into my food. "Dr. Thorne is a drug called haloperidol," I stated clearly, my voice ringing like a bell in the quiet room. "She was deliberately feeding me 50 milligrams every single day. Tell me, doctor, in your expert medical opinion, what does a massive unprescribed dose of a high-potency, typical antipsychotic do to a perfectly healthy 74-year-old man?" "You were about to sign a document declaring me insane based entirely on the artificial symptoms of a lethal poison that my son paid to have administered. You are standing in the middle of a massive federal crime scene, and you are holding the murder weapon." The truth was finally out in the open, and the walls were closing in on them. There was no escape. Derek suddenly broke from his paralyzed stance with a loud animalistic shout. His face twisted into a grotesque mask of desperation as he lunged across the living room rug. He threw himself toward the massive brick fireplace, abandoning any pretense of the sophisticated son he had portrayed moments before. He clawed frantically at the cables hidden behind the flat screen, desperate to rip the power cord from the wall and plunge the room back into darkness. His manicured fingernails scraped against the rough masonry, tearing the skin, but he did not feel the pain. He was a cornered rat trying to chew his way out of a trap. "Shut it off," he screamed, his voice cracking into a shrill shriek. "Shut that damn thing off right now. You stupid old fool, you have no idea what you are doing." I did not move from my leather recliner. I simply watched his pathetic struggle with the detached observation of a judge presiding over a final sentencing. My thumb rested over the remote in my hand. "You are right, Derek," I said, raising my voice effortlessly over his frantic screaming. "I am an old fool. I was foolish enough to believe you loved your mother. I was foolish enough to think you had a shred of human decency left inside your soul. But my eyes are wide open now. I pressed the next button on the remote. The video of Natalie instantly vanished from the giant screen. The display shifted to a solid black background. The silence in the room was only momentary. A harsh burst of static hissed through the premium surround sound speakers vibrating the floorboards beneath our feet. Then the undeniable audio recording began to play. The rhythmic thrum of the auto repair shop filled my living room. I watched Derek freeze, his hands hopelessly tangled in the cables. His body went rigid as his voice echoed off the walls. "Look, I do not care how you do it," the digital version of my son said casually. "Just make sure it is untraceable. I am paying you a premium for a clean job." The blood drained completely from Derek's face, leaving him looking like a hollow ghost. The raspy voice of the mechanic replied, detailing exactly how he would weaken the fluid lines of my wife's 1998 Volvo. He explained how the pressure would blow the seals on the steep mountain incline, and then the final unforgivable nail was hammered firmly into the coffin. "Cut the brake lines on the Volvo," Derek's recorded voice commanded with absolute chilling indifference. "Make it look like old age wear and tear. My mother drives it to the hills every Sunday. Just get it done." The audio clicked off, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Dr. Thorne stumbled backward, collapsing onto the edge of the velvet sofa, gasping for air. Natalie fell to her knees, burying her face in her hands, letting out a sob of pure terror. She finally understood the magnitude of the monster she had married. But Detective Mitchell did not cry. He realized instantly that he was trapped in a room with a murder confession, and his corruption was directly tied to the victim. Panic seized his mind. He took a rapid step backward, his hand dropping instinctively to his duty belt. His fingers unsnapped the retention strap of his holster and wrapped tightly around the textured grip of his service weapon. "Do not even think about drawing that weapon, Mitchell," I warned, my voice cutting through the tension like a sharpened blade. But the corrupt detective was too far gone in his panic. He began to pull the heavy black pistol from its holster, preparing to shoot his way out of the mansion and escape the devastating consequences of his greed. He never got the chance to raise the barrel. A tremendous explosive crash shattered the stillness of the afternoon. The solid wood front door of my house was violently kicked off its brass hinges. It splintered inward, crashing onto the marble floor of the foyer with a deafening roar. Simultaneously, the reinforced glass of the back patio doors shattered into a million sparkling pieces as a battering ram smashed through the frame. The house was instantly flooded with heavily armed tactical personnel. They poured into the living room from both directions, a highly coordinated tide of dark body armor, ballistic helmets, and raised assault rifles. At the head of the assault team was Garrett Cole. He moved with the lethal grace of a military veteran who had spent his life mastering the ambush. He did not wear a federal windbreaker, but the FBI agents flanking him followed his lead without question. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," a commanding voice shouted over the chaos. "Drop the weapon right now. Get your hands in the air. Drop it." Mitchell hesitated for one fatal second, his eyes wide with shock, as red laser sights painted his chest. Garrett did not wait for the corrupt cop to make up his mind. He closed the distance in two massive strides, grabbed Mitchell by the wrist, and twisted it violently upward. The service weapon clattered harmlessly to the hardwood floor. Garrett kicked the gun across the room, slammed Mitchell hard against the drywall, and kicked his legs apart. The metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around Mitchell's wrists sounded like the sweetest music I had ever heard. Across the room, two federal agents tackled Derek to the ground. My son did not put up a fight. He simply collapsed onto the rug he had purchased with my stolen money, curling into a pathetic ball as the agents pulled his arms behind his back. Natalie was sobbing hysterically, surrounded by officers who ordered her to the ground. I remained seated in my leather recliner, watching the flawless execution of absolute justice. My heart beat with a steady rhythm. The storm had finally broken, and I was the only one left standing. The living room was now a chaotic symphony of federal authority. The heavy boots of the tactical agents stomped across the hardwood floors, their radios buzzing with clipped, efficient commands. Detective Mitchell was the first to be hauled out. Two massive agents dragged him to his feet, his uniform crumpled and his badge stripped from his chest. He did not say a single word. He did not look at me. He just stared at the floor, the stark realization of his ruined life settling heavily onto his shoulders. He knew the federal prison system had absolutely no mercy for corrupt cops who helped murder innocent women. They pushed him through the shattered front door into the blinding flashes of the sirens that now completely flooded my quiet street. With the corrupt detective removed, the room's attention shifted to the remaining conspirators. Dr. Thorne, the distinguished psychiatrist, who had been so eager to lock me away just minutes ago, was desperately trying to negotiate his way out of the nightmare. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, his voice trembling as he backed away from an advancing federal agent. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding," Dr. Thorne pleaded. "I had absolutely no idea about any of this. I was simply called here for a standard medical consultation. I am a licensed medical professional." Garrett stepped forward, his expression carved from solid granite. "You were hired to rubber stamp a fraudulent diagnosis for a financial conspiracy." Dr. Garrett stated, his voice echoing loudly. "We have the wire transfers from Derek's offshore accounts directly to your private clinic. You are not a doctor anymore. You are a co-conspirator to federal fraud and elder abuse. Put your hands behind your back." The doctor let out a pathetic whimper, offering no physical resistance as the cold steel cuffs locked tightly around his wrists. They marched him out, leaving only my daughter-in-law and my son. Natalie was entirely unhinged. The sophisticated, cruel woman who had forcefully slapped my hand away and mocked my fake dementia was completely gone. In her place was a terrified, hysterical mess. As two agents pulled her to her feet, she began to thrash wildly, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. She turned her panicked, desperate eyes toward Derek, who was still pinned to the rug. "It was his fault," Natalie screamed, her voice tearing through the room. She pointed a trembling finger at her husband. "He made me do it. He bought the drugs. He told me to put them in the food. I did not know anything about the car crash. I swear to God I did not know he killed Martha. He told me it was just to get the money to pay off the loan sharks. You have to believe me, Harrison. Tell them I did not know about Martha." I looked at her, my face completely impassive. "You willingly fed a neurotoxic poison to a man you believed was defenseless, Natalie," I replied, my voice steady and unforgiving. "You laughed while you did it. You are exactly where you belong." She let out a piercing wail of despair as the agents dragged her out of the room, her cries fading into the chaotic noise of the front lawn. Then there was only Derek. The federal agents slowly pulled him up from the floor, securing his hands tightly behind his back. The tailored navy blue suit he had worn to celebrate his ultimate victory was now covered in dust and wrinkled beyond repair. He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically, searching for any possible loophole, any escape route that simply did not exist. The digital fortress he had built was completely breached. The police officer he had purchased was in handcuffs. The wife who had helped him was turning against him. He was completely, utterly isolated. As the agents began to walk him toward the door, Derek suddenly dug the heels of his expensive leather shoes into the hardwood floor. He fought against the grip of the officers with a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline. He threw his weight forward, breaking their hold just enough to stumble across the room and collapse violently onto his knees right at the base of my leather recliner. He threw his upper body forward, his cuffed hands useless behind him, and pressed his tear-stained face against my legs. He was weeping openly now, loud, ugly, gasping sobs that shook his entire body. "Dad, please," Derek begged, his voice cracking and breaking with absolute terror. "Please, you have to stop them. Tell them to stop. I am your son. I am your only boy. You cannot let them take me away to prison. I will give it all back. I will sign the trust back over to you today. I will do whatever you want." Please, Dad, I was just so scared of the people I owed money to. They were going to kill me. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but you can fix this. You always fix things for me. Do not do this to me. I sat in my chair looking down at the top of his perfectly combed hair. I felt the wetness of his tears soaking through the fabric of my trousers. 42 years ago, I had held this boy in my arms and promised to protect him from the world. I had worked my hands to the bone to give him a life of privilege and comfort. I had sold the company I built from scratch just to save him from his own failures. And he had repaid that lifetime of boundless love by murdering the woman who gave him life and trying to destroy my mind. I slowly reached down and placed my hand firmly on his shoulder. For a fraction of a second, he stopped crying. He looked up at me, a pathetic glimmer of desperate hope shining in his bloodshot eyes. He actually believed, even after everything he had done, that my love for him was a weakness he could exploit one final time. He thought the father who had always bailed him out would save him from the abyss. I looked directly into his eyes, stripping away every ounce of warmth, every shred of paternal affection I had ever felt for him. My expression was an absolute, terrifying void. You stopped being my son the day you cut the brakes on your mother's car, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. Enjoy hell. The faint light of hope in his eyes was instantly extinguished, replaced by a dark, suffocating despair. The federal agents stepped forward, grabbing him roughly by the shoulders and hauling him to his feet. He did not fight them this time. His legs gave out beneath him, and they had to practically drag him backward across the room. He stared at me the entire time, his mouth opening and closing silently, a broken, defeated monster being led to the slaughter. I watched them pull him through the shattered doorway and out into the cold, unforgiving light of the afternoon. The house suddenly fell into a deep, profound silence. I was entirely alone, but finally, truly free. The silence that settled over my house that afternoon was not the heavy, suffocating quiet of a tomb. It was the clear, pristine silence of a slate wiped clean. Over the next 6 months, the justice system moved with a swift and merciless efficiency that surprised even me. The mountain of digital and physical evidence Garrett and the federal agents had compiled was absolutely insurmountable. There were no lengthy trials, no dramatic courtroom theatrics, and no clever defense attorneys who could magically explain away the horrific crimes captured on video and audio. The digital ledgers of the offshore accounts, the toxicology reports of the poisoned food, and the recorded confessions painted a picture of premeditated evil that left the judges completely appalled. It was a total victory, but the cost was high. When the final sentencing day arrived, I sat in the front row of the federal courtroom, wearing the same dark suit I had worn to my wife's funeral. Derek stood before the judge clad in a bright orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to his waist. He looked frail, his once perfect hair thinning and unkempt. The judge did not mince words. She looked down at him with profound disgust and handed down the maximum penalty the law allowed. For the orchestrated first-degree murder of his own mother and the attempted destruction of his father, Derek Ward, was sentenced to life in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. He did not turn to look at me as the bailiffs led him away. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, finally understanding that his arrogance had cost him his entire existence. He would never breathe free air again, and in that quiet moment, I felt the heavy burden of the past completely lift from my weary shoulders. Natalie did not fare much better. Despite her desperate attempts to turn state's evidence and blame everything on her husband, the camera footage of her laughing while actively poisoning my food sealed her fate. The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, and severe fraud. She wept hysterically as the judge slammed the gavel, sentencing her to 20 hard years behind bars. Detective Mitchell, the man who had sold his badge and his honor for $100,000 in blood money, was stripped of his pension and sent to a federal prison where corrupt cops are treated without a single ounce of mercy. Even Dr. Thorne, the distinguished psychiatrist, who thought he was untouchable, lost his medical license and was sentenced to 10 years for his role in the criminal conspiracy. The entire rotten network was dismantled, pulled out by the roots and thrown into the fire, and reduced to nothing but bitter ashes. With the legal battles over and the perpetrators locked away, I found myself driving back down that winding road toward the cemetery. The weather was different this time. The violent freezing storm that had raged during Martha's funeral was a distant memory. The sky was a brilliant, endless blue, and the warm afternoon sun filtered through the green leaves of the ancient oak trees lining the pathways. I parked my truck and walked slowly across the manicured grass. I carried a single bouquet of yellow roses, Martha's favorite flower. I knelt beside her polished marble headstone, tracing the elegant lettering of her name with my fingertips. The crushing grief that had threatened to consume me 6 months ago had transformed into a quiet, enduring peace. I placed the yellow roses gently against the base of the stone. "It is over, Martha," I whispered, my voice steady and filled with a deep, resonating calm. "The monster is gone. He will never hurt anyone again." I closed my eyes, letting the gentle breeze wash over my face, and for a brief moment, I could almost feel the warmth of her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I stayed there for a long time, talking to her about the future, about the promises I intended to keep. I told her that our 30 years of hard work, the millions of dollars we had sacrificed our youth to build, would not end up funding a criminal empire or buying expensive cars for ungrateful children. It was going to serve a higher, nobler purpose, a purpose that honors her spirit. The following week, I contacted Victor and Garrett. I gave them explicit instructions to liquidate my estate. The massive colonial house with its heated pool and manicured lawns was put on the market and sold to a lovely young family. The remaining millions in the family trust, the money Derek had been so willing to kill for, was withdrawn. I used every single penny to establish a comprehensive legal and medical foundation dedicated to protecting the vulnerable. We named it the Martha Ward Initiative. We hired aggressive forensic accountants, private investigators, and dedicated lawyers who offer free services to elderly individuals who suspect they are being financially abused or medically manipulated by their toxic relatives. In the past few months alone, we have saved dozens of seniors from being locked away in psychiatric wards by greedy children. We have reclaimed stolen homes and emptied bank accounts, delivering the justice that I brought down upon my son. I lost the family I thought I had, but I found a new one in the countless people I have been able to help. I learned that true strength does not come from the blood in your veins, but from the unwavering courage to stand up against evil even when that evil sleeps right under your own roof. Blood isn't an excuse for betrayal. If someone shows you they are a monster, believe them the first time. Have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories. Until next time, protect your peace.